7:17. The remainder of the meat of this offering must be burned with fire on the third day. Vows. Law number 92. A Nazirite must let his hair grow during the period of separation. Numbers 6:5. During the entire period of his vow separation, no razor may be used on his head. He must be holy until the period of his separation to Yahweh is over. He must let the hair of his head grow long. Law number 93. A Nazirite must shave his head and bring the sacrifice when the period of separation is over. Numbers 6:18. Then at the entrance to the tent of meeting, the Nazirite must shave off the hair that he dedicated. He is to take the hair and put it in the fire that is under the sacrifice of the peace offering. Law number 94. Vows and oaths to Yahweh must be kept. Deuteronomy 23:21-23. If you make a vow to Yahweh, you must not delay to pay it, for Yahweh your Father will certainly demand it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from even making the vow in the first place, you will not be sinning. Whatever goes out of your mouth, you must be sure to do, because you made your vow freely of your own free will to Yahweh your Father with your own mouth. Law number 95. The law of binding and losing a vow. Numbers 32-16. When a man vows a vow to Yahweh or vows an oath to bind himself to some pledge, he shall not break his word. He must do everything he said he would do. When a young woman still living in her father's house vows a vow to Yahweh or vows an oath to bind herself to some pledge, and her father hears about her vow or pledge but says nothing to her, then all her vows and every pledge by which she has obligated herself will stand. But if her father forbids her when he hears about it, none of her vows or pledges by which she has obligated herself will stand. Yahweh will release her because her father has forbidden her. If she marries after she makes a vow or after she utters a rash promise by which she obligates herself, and her husband hears about it and says nothing to her, then her vows or the pledges by which she obligated herself will stand. But if her husband forbids her when he hears about it, he nullifies the vow that obligates her or the rash promise by which she has obligated herself, and Yahweh will release her. But any vow or pledge taken by a widow or divorced woman will be binding upon her. If a woman living with her husband makes a vow or obligates herself by a pledge under oath, and her husband hears about it but says nothing to her and does not forbid her, then all her vows or the pledges she has obligated herself to will stand. But if her husband nullifies them when he hears about them, then none of her vows or pledges that came from her mouth will stand. Her husband has forbidden them, and Yahweh will release her. Her husband may confirm her vow, or her husband may make it void. But if her husband says nothing to her about it from day to day, then he confirms all her vows or the pledges binding upon her. He has confirmed them by saying nothing to her when he hears about them. If he, however, nullifies them sometime after he hears about them, then he is responsible for her guilt. These are the statutes Yahweh gave Moshe concerning relationships between a man and his wife, and between a father and his young daughter still living in his house. Ritual purity. Law number 96. Anyone who touches or eats the carcass of an unclean animal becomes ritually unclean. Leviticus 11:8-24. Their meat you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you. And by these you will make yourself become unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them will be unclean until sunset. Law number 97. Anyone who touches or eats the carcass of a clean animal that dies of itself or is torn by wild animals becomes ritually unclean. Leviticus 11:39-40. If an animal you are allowed to eat dies, he who touches its carcass shall be unclean until sunset. Anyone who eats of its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until sunset. He also who carries its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until sunset. Leviticus 17:15. Anyone, whether he is a native of your own country or a stranger, who eats anything found dead or torn by wild animals, he shall both wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until sunset. Then he shall be clean. Law number 98. Articles that come in contact with sources of ritual uncleanness become ritually unclean. Leviticus 11:32 and 34. When one of them dies and falls on something, that article, whatever its use, shall be unclean, whether an item of wood, clothing, skin, or sack. Whatever item it is that is used in work, it must be put in water, and it shall be unclean until sunset, then it shall be clean. Any food that could be eaten but has water on it from such a vessel is unclean, and any liquid that could be drunk from it is unclean. Law number 99. Menstruous women are ritually unclean. Leviticus 15:19 through 24. When a woman's flow of blood, nida, zava, has ended, she will continue in her impurity for 7 days. Anyone who touches her during this time will be unclean until sunset. Anything she lies on during her period will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. Whoever touches her bed must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until sunset. Whoever touches anything she sits on must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until sunset. Whether it is the bed or anything she was sitting on, when anyone touches it, he will be unclean until sunset. If a man lies with her and her monthly flow touches him, he will be unclean for 7 days. Any bed he lies on will be unclean. Law number 100. Women after childbirth are ritually unclean. Leviticus 12:2-5. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a woman has conceived and gives birth to a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days, as in the days of her monthly period. She shall be unclean. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin must be circumcised. She shall then continue in the blood of her purification 33 more days. She shall not touch any holy thing, kodesh, nor come into any consecrated place, mikvash, until the days of her purification are over, for a total of 40 days. However, if she gives birth to a female child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, 14 days, as in her monthly period, and she shall continue in the blood of her purification 66 more days, for a total of 80 days. Law number 101. Anyone with a spreading skin disease is ritually unclean. Leviticus 13:2-3. When anyone has a swelling or a rash or a bright spot on his skin that may become an infectious skin disease like leprosy, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons the priest. The priest shall look at the sore on the skin of the body, and if the hair on the sore has turned white and the sore appears deeper than the rest of his skin, it is an infectious skin disease. When the priest examines him, he shall pronounce him ceremonially unclean. Law number 102. Any clothing contaminated with a spreading disease is ritually unclean. Leviticus 13:47-50-51. And if any clothing is contaminated with mildew, woolen or linen clothing, the priest is to examine the mildew and isolate the articles in question for 7 days. On the 7th day he is to re-examine it, and if the mildew has spread in the clothing, in the woven or knitted material, or in the leather, whatever its use, it is a destructive mildew, the article is unclean. Law number 103. A house contaminated by a spreading disease is ritually unclean. Leviticus 14:34-44. When you enter the land of Canaan, which I give you as a possession, and I put a spreading mildew in a house in that land, then the priest is to go and examine it again, and if the mildew has spread in the house, it is a destructive mildew, the house is unclean. Law number 104. A man having an abnormal discharge, zab, is ritually unclean. Leviticus 15:2. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any man has a discharge, that discharge is unclean. Law number 105. Anyone or anything coming into contact with semen becomes ritually unclean. Leviticus 15:16-18. When any man has an emission of semen, then he shall bathe all his body in water, and he will be unclean until sunset. Any clothing or leather that has semen on it must be washed with water, and it will be unclean until sunset. When a man lies with a woman and there is an emission of semen, both must bathe with water, and they will be unclean until sunset. Law number 106. A woman with an abnormal discharge, zaba, is ritually unclean. Leviticus 15:19-25-28. When a woman's flow of blood, nida, zava, has ended, she will continue in her impurity for 7 days. Anyone who touches her during this time will be unclean until sunset. When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time other than her monthly period, zava, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, zava, she will be unclean as long as she has the discharge. She will be unclean just as in the days of her period. Any bed she lies on while her discharge continues will be unclean, as her bed is during her monthly period, and anything she sits on will be unclean just as during her monthly period. Whoever touches them will be unclean. He must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until sunset. When her discharge has finally stopped, she must count off 7 clear days. Then she must purify herself. Law number 107. A human corpse and anyone who comes near it is ritually unclean. Numbers 19:11-14. He who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean 7 days. He must purify himself with the water of the red heifer after the 3rd day and after the 7th day. Then he will be clean. But if he does not purify himself after the 3rd day and after the 7th day, he will not be clean. Whoever touches the dead body of anyone and fails to purify himself defiles the tabernacle of Yahweh. That person shall be cut off from Israel. He shall remain unclean because the water of purification was not sprinkled on him. His uncleanness is still on him. This is the law that applies when a person dies in a tent. Anyone who enters the tent and anyone who is in it will be unclean for 7 days. Law number 108. The purification water purifies the ritually unclean. Numbers 19:9. Then a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the red heifer and put them in a ceremonially clean place outside the camp. They shall be kept by them for the congregation of the children of Israel, for the water of purification from impurity. It is for purifying from sin. Law number 109. Those ritually unclean must purify at the appointed time by laundering their clothes and immersing in water. Leviticus 15:27. Whoever touches them will be unclean. He must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean until sunset. Law number 110. Those ritually unclean of a spreading skin disease must follow the specified purification procedure. Leviticus 14, verse 2. This shall be the law for the leprous or diseased person, for the day of his cleansing, when he shall be brought to the priest. Law number 111. Those unclean of a spreading skin disease must shave off all their hair. Leviticus 14:9. On the 7th day he must shave off all his hair. He must shave his head, his beard, his eyebrows, and the rest of his hair. He must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water, and then he will be clean. Law number 112. Those unclean of a spreading skin disease must be easily distinguishable. Leviticus 13:45. The person with such an infectious disease must wear torn clothes, uncover his head, cover the lower part of his face, and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." Law number 113. The ashes of the red heifer are to be used in ritual purification. Numbers 19:2-9. This is a statute of the law of Yahweh has commanded, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and tell them to bring you a red heifer without blemish or defect, and that has never been under a yoke, never having been used for secular purposes. Then a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the red heifer and put them in a ceremonial clean place outside the camp. They shall be kept by them for the congregation of the children of Israel for the water of purification from impurity. It is for purifying from sin. Tithes and offerings to the house of Yahweh. Law number 114. The priest must set the value of a person dedicated to Yahweh. Leviticus 27:2, 8, and 25. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when a man consecrates by a special vow certain persons to Yahweh by giving equivalent values, if anyone making the vow is too poor to pay the specified amount, he is to present the person to the priest, who will set the value for him according to what the man making the vow can afford. Every value is to be set according to the sanctuary shekel, 20 gerahs to the shekel, about 1/50 ounce of silver to each gerah. Law number 115. The priest must set the value of an animal dedicated to Yahweh. Leviticus 27:11-13 and 27. If what he vowed is a ceremonially unclean animal, one that is not acceptable as an offering to Yahweh, the animal must be presented to the priest. who will judge its quality as worthy or bad. Whatever value the priest then sets, that is what it will be. If the owner desires at all to redeem it, then he must add 1/5 to the priest's valuation. If it is an unclean animal, then he may redeem it according to the valuation of the priest, and shall add 1/5 of its value to it. If it is not redeemed, then it shall be sold according to the priest's valuation. Law number 116. The priest must set the value of a house dedicated to Yahweh. Leviticus 27:14-15. If a man dedicates his house as something holy to Yahweh, the priest will judge its value for it, so shall it remain. If the man who dedicates his house redeems it, he must add 1/5 more to its valuation. The house will again become his. Law number 117. The priest must set the value of a field dedicated to Yahweh. Leviticus 27:16-22-23. If a man dedicates to Yahweh part of his inherited family land, its value is to be set according to the amount of seed needed to plant it. A homer of barley seed, probably about 6 bushels, shall be valued at 50 shekels of silver, about 1 1/4 pounds of silver. If a man dedicates to Yahweh a field he has bought, which is not a part of his inherited family land, then the priest will determine its value up to the year of Jubilee, and the man must pay the priest's valuation on that day as a holy offering to Yahweh. Law number 118. If one sins ignorantly regarding the holy offerings, full restitution must be made, adding 1/5 of the value to it. Leviticus 22:14. If anyone eats a holy offering by mistake, he must make restitution to the priest for the offering and add 1/5 of the value to it. Law number 119. The fruit of the 4th year's growth is holy and must be given to the priest. Leviticus 19:23-25. When you have come into the land and plant any kind of fruit tree, regard its fruit as uncircumcised, that is forbidden. 3 years it shall be forbidden to you, it shall not be eaten. In the 4th year all its fruit will be holy, as a praise offering to Yahweh, which you will give to the priests. Then in the 5th year you may eat its fruit. In this way your harvest will be increased. I am Yahweh, your Father. Law number 120. The corners of a field that is reaped must be left for the poor. Leviticus 19:9. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not completely harvest the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. Law number 121. The gleanings of a field that is reaped must be left for the poor. Leviticus 19:9. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not completely harvest the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. Law number 122. The forgotten sheaves of a field that is reaped must be left for the poor. Deuteronomy 24:19. When you are gathering the harvest in your field and forget to pick up a sheaf, you must not go back to get it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, so Yahweh your Father will bless you in all the work of your hands. Law number 123. Any remaining olives or grapes must be left for the poor. Deuteronomy 24:20-21. When you beat the olives from your trees, you must not go over the boughs twice. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. When you harvest the grapes of your vineyard, do not go over the vines again. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Law number 124. Any fallen grapes must be left for the poor. Leviticus 19:10. You shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather every grape of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am Yahweh your Father. Law number 125. The first fruits of all our labor must be separated and brought to the house of Yahweh. Exodus 23:19. The first of the first fruits of your land you shall bring into the house of Yahweh. Law number 126. All holy offerings must be given to the priest at the house of Yahweh. Numbers 18:8-14 and 21. Then Yahweh said to Aaron, I myself have put you in charge of the offerings presented to me. Terma. All the holy offerings the children of Israel give to me, I give to you and to your sons as your portion and regular share. You are to have the part of the most holy offerings kept back and reserved from the fire, from all the gifts they bring to me as most holy offerings, from every grain offering, from every sin offering, and from every trespass offering which they give to me, that part belongs to you and to your sons. In a most holy place you shall eat it, every male shall eat it. you must regard it as holy. This is also yours. Whatever is set aside from the gifts of all the wave offerings of the children of Israel, I give this to you and to your sons and daughters as your regular share. Everyone in your household who is ceremonially clean may eat it. I give you all the finest olive oil and all the finest new wine, and the grain they give to Yahweh as the first fruits of their harvest. All the first ripe fruit in their land, which they bring to Yahweh, shall be yours. Everyone in your household who is ceremonially clean may eat it. Everything in Israel that is devoted to Yahweh, Kerem, is yours. See, I give the children of Levi all the tithes, the tenth in Israel, as their inheritance in return for the work they perform and do while serving at the tent of meeting. Law number 127. The first tithe, the first tenth of all our increase must be given to the house of Yahweh for the work of Yahweh. Leviticus 27, verse 30. And all the tithe, that is 1/10 of everything from the land, of the seed of the land, of the fruit of the tree, belongs to Yahweh. It is holy to Yahweh. Deuteronomy 14:22. You must truly tithe all your income, grain, money you are paid, animals, year by year. Deuteronomy 12:6. There you must bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts you have vowed to give, your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. Law number 128. The second tithe must be set aside for the feasts of Yahweh. Deuteronomy 14:23-26. Eat the second tithe of your grain, your new wine, your oil, and the firstlings of your herds and of your flocks in front of Yahweh your Father in the place he chooses to establish his name, thereby learning to reverence Yahweh your Father always. But if the way is too long for you, so you are not able to carry it, or if the place Yahweh your Father has chosen to set his name is too far from you, when Yahweh your Father has blessed you, then you are to exchange it into money and take money into your hand, and you shall go to the place Yahweh your Father chooses. Then you shall spend that money for whatever you desire to have, for oxen, or for sheep, or for wine, or for strong drink, or for whatever you desire to have. You shall then eat there in front of Yahweh your Father, and you shall rejoice, you and your household. Law number 129. The priests and Levites must also tithe to the work of Yahweh. Numbers 18:25-28-29. Then Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, In this way you shall also offer an offering, teru, to Yahweh from all your tithes you receive from the children of Israel. From these tithes you must give Yahweh's portion, the first tithe, to Aaron the priest. You must present as Yahweh's portion the tenth, the best and holiest part of everything that has been given to you. Law number 130. The third tithe must be set aside for the poor in the 3rd and 6th years of the 7th year cycle. Deuteronomy 14:28-29. Toward the end of every 3rd year, you shall bring forth all of your income designated that year, the 3rd tithe, and store it within your gates, the house of Yahweh. So the Levite, who is also allotted the first tithe, because he has no portion nor inheritance with you, and the stranger and the fatherless and the widow who are within your gates, may come to Yahweh's feast and eat, and be satisfied, so Yahweh your Father may bless you in all the work of your hands. Law number 131. Tithes and offerings must be presented to Yahweh with prayer. Deuteronomy 26:13-14. Then you shall vow in front of Yahweh your Father, I have removed this holy portion, my first tithe, from my house, and also I have given my 3rd tithe for the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, according to all your laws which you have commanded me. I have not transgressed your laws, nor have I forgotten them. I have not eaten my second tithe in reverence to any god, El Terpah, nor have I removed my second tithe while I was unclean, nor have I offered any of my second tithe to the dead. I have obeyed Yahweh my Father. I have done everything you have commanded me. Law number 132. Each household is to bring or send their tithes and offerings before Yahweh to the house of Yahweh. No Christian collection plate. Deuteronomy 26:2-4 and 10. You must take some of the first of all the fruit of the earth, which you shall bring from the land Yahweh your Father has given you, and you must put it in a basket and go to the place Yahweh your Father will choose to establish his name. And say to the one who is priest in those days, I declare unto Yahweh my Father this day that I have come to the country which Yahweh vowed on oath to our forefathers to give us. Then the priest shall take the basket out of your hand and set it down in front of the altar of Yahweh your Father. And now, behold, I have brought the first fruits of the land which you, O Yahweh, have given me. Then you shall set it before Yahweh your Father and worship before Yahweh your Father. Law number 133. The first portion of the grain offering must be given to the priest at the house of Yahweh. Numbers 15:20-21. Present a cake, challah, from the first of your ground meal, and present it as an offering from the threshing floor. Throughout your generations you shall give this offering to Yahweh from the first of your ground meal. The sabbatical year. Law number 134. Every seventh year is a Sabbath of rest for the land. Leviticus 25:2-5. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath unto Yahweh. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard, and gather in its fruit. But in the seventh year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to Yahweh. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. What grows voluntarily of your harvest you shall not reap, nor gather the grapes of your unintended vine. The land is to have a year of rest. Law number 135. In the seventh year, everything that grows is to be eaten by all. Exodus 23:10-11. 6 years shall you sow your land and gather in its produce. But the seventh year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, so that the poor among your people may get food from it, and the wild animals may eat what is left. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive grove. Leviticus 25:6. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, your manservant and maidservant, for the hired worker, and for the stranger who lives among you. Law number 136. You must consecrate and proclaim the Jubilee year. Leviticus 25:10-12. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his possession, and each of you shall return to his family. That 50th year shall be a jubilee to you. In it you shall neither sow nor reap what grows voluntarily, nor gather the grapes from your unintended vines. For it is the jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat its produce from the field. Law number 137. On the Day of Atonement in the Jubilee year, the shofar must be sounded and Hebrew slaves set free. Leviticus 25:9-10 and 13. Then you have the trumpet of the Jubilee sounded everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th moon. On the Day of Atonement, sound the trumpet throughout your land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. And each of you shall return to his possession, and each of you shall return to his family. In this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his possession. Law number 138. In the Jubilee year, all the land is to be returned to its appointed owners. Leviticus 25:23-24 and 28. The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you are but strangers and my tenants. Throughout the country that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land. But if he is not able to restore it to himself, then what was sold shall remain in the hand of him who bought it until the year of Jubilee. Then in the Jubilee it shall be released, and he shall return to his possession. Law number 139. In a walled city, the seller has a right to buy back a house within a year of the sale. Leviticus 25:29-30. If a man sells a house in a walled city, then he may redeem it within a whole year after it is sold. Within a full year he may redeem it. But if it is not redeemed within the space of a full year, then the house in the walled city shall permanently belong to him who bought it. Throughout his generations it shall not be released in the Jubilee. Law number 140. The years until the Jubilee must be counted. Leviticus 25:8. And you shall count 7 Sabbath of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, and the time of the 7th Sabbath of years shall be to you 49 years. Law number 141. The 7th year is the year of release. Deuteronomy 15:1-3. At the end of 7 years you shall grant a release. This is the form of the release. Every creditor who has lent to his brother shall cancel the loan he has made. He shall not press his brother for payment, for a release has been proclaimed in honor of Yahweh. Yahweh's release. From a foreigner you may press for payment, but you shall release what is owed from your brother. Law number 142. In the 7th year, a foreigner may be pressed for a payment of a debt. Deuteronomy 15, verse 3. From a foreigner you may press for payment, but you shall release what is owed from your brother. Clean animals fit for consumption and offering. Law number 143. The priests must receive their share of all clean animals that are slaughtered. Deuteronomy 18, verse 3. This shall be the priest's share from the people who kill a bull or a sheep, slaughtered for ordinary consumption, the shoulder, the cheeks, and the inner parts. Law number 144. The priest must receive the first fleece from the shearing of sheep. Deuteronomy 18, verse 4. You are to give them the first fruits of your grain, new wine,